thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. You found us in the middle of a three-part series. Today is the second part. It's with George Barna. George was with us over at the ProFamily Legislators Conference. That's where we bring in state reps and senators from around the nation, give them a chance to exchange ideas, to share things that are going well in their states or things that are going the wrong direction, and get ideas on how to turn it around. At that conference, we have a lot of great speakers that are experts on the culture and how to win the culture war. George Barna is one of those guys. Just phenomenal research that he's done. He is a respected expert by so many in Christian circles, in the media, in politics. Pastors study him. He just does a great job of equipping you with information that will help you make good decisions. And not only folks in those leadership positions, I have loved his books myself. His books on parenting are fantastic. I've learned so much and applied so much. I encourage you to check out his book, Revolutionary Parenting, and so many others of his books. His website is barna.org. But we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. If you missed yesterday for some reason, you can go right now to wallbuilderslive.com, click on the archives, and grab yesterday's program, and you'll be caught up. Today will be the second part, and we'll finish it up tomorrow. But let's pick up right where we left off yesterday with George Barna.
Asian Americans, where there was a 24-point switch shifting away from the Democratic candidates to Republican candidates. That's huge. Now, they only represent about 4% of the total voting population. But when you look at presidential races, which need every point they can get, that's a group that you don't want to ignore. Can that be sustained? That's yet to be seen. We'll talk about that. Hispanics, 9 points higher in terms of supporting Republican candidates this time around, partly due to the lower turnout, partly due to some other things I'll describe in a minute. The under 30 group, 6 points higher for Republicans than last time out. And among blacks, 3 points higher. Not a huge shift, but I think we may see that shift even more in the next election when President Obama is not heading the ticket for Democrats. If we jump inside those numbers a little bit, what do we see? The Republican margin across the country at the congressional level was about just under 7 points. But keep this in mind. Yes, Republicans fared well, but they did so by attracting only 20% of the vote from all eligible voters across the country. So that doesn't really give us a whole lot to build on for 2016. When we look at where a lot of that vote came from, there is definitely a racial or ethnic gap in the country. You find out that 55% of whites voted for Republicans. It says D there, it should say R. Non-whites, 72% for Democrats. So big split there. When you look in the South, the margin is even bigger. And to some extent misleads us about how strong the Republican Party is nationally. Southern whites gave Republicans a 42-point margin. But outside the South, whites gave Republicans just an 8-point margin. So we've even got to be cognizant of that as we think about strategy for what's coming. How do we fare better in the future? Well, we have to target particular groups that we want to have a great effect on. Certainly the Asian American population, as I alluded to, is one we want to look at. They split 50 to 49 for Republicans in this particular race. Is that sustainable? We don't know. We've never had, at least in the recent past, we haven't had that high level of support from the Asian American population. Women, 47% voted for Republicans, majority voted for the Democrats. That's something that can be changed. The big challenge there is going to be single women, for whom more than 60% voted for Democrats, for reasons we'll talk about. The under 30 crowd, 43%, vied for the Republican candidates. Not a bad base to build on if we could consider that a base. I'm not sure that we can. Moderates, 45% voted for Republicans. We're going to have to increase that in the next race. Independents, 54% voted for Republicans. That was a very, very important element in the victories. And Hispanics, 38% voted for Republicans. Again, that's going to be a more significant number in the next election.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the minds of many today, government is a purely secular institution and is not in any way to be joined to religious principles. The result is that too often our public policies are now enacted without any consideration of their spiritual consequences. However, the Founding Fathers believed that even a political act should always be examined from a spiritual viewpoint. For example, in his inaugural address, President George Washington declared, "We ought to be persuaded that the favorable smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained." President George Washington believed that the blessings of heaven would reside on this nation only so long as its national policies embraced godly standards.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Let's talk for a moment about that Hispanic vote. There's a lot of agitation nationally about who these people are, who they vote for, why they vote the way that they vote, and so forth. What we know is that since 2006, the percentage of the Hispanic population that are eligible voters has risen from less than 9% up to 11%. And that will continue to grow. Every month, on average, more than 50,000 Hispanic kids turn 18 and therefore are eligible to vote. Now, many of them choose not to register, but nevertheless, that is the fastest growing electoral segment in the country. When we look at what happened in this election, however, the Hispanic population had the lowest turnout of any of the major ethnic groups, 4 major ethnic groups, at just 31%. Part of the reason why that may be is that despite the fact that the media froths at the mouth about the Hispanic population and its voting potential, only about 4 out of 10 Hispanics actually were contacted by a party or a candidate, according to them, during the course of the electoral cycle. That's lower than the national average. They were contacted more often by Democrats than Republicans by about a 3-2 margin. And so if we're serious about winning that group of people, we have to have more connections with them. By the way, the group that was most frequently contacted during the course of the election cycle were white women, 81% of whom said that they were contacted by at least one entity, about 2/3 of whom said they were contacted by both parties during the course of the cycle. We might think about upping our interest in the Hispanic population. Now, it's a difficult group of people to understand in some ways. When you look at their loyalty to party, what we find is that the Hispanics gave the Democrats a margin of 22 points in 2010, 38 points in the last presidential election. That dropped back down to 26 points this time, which can only partially be explained by turnout. So we've got to understand better what's going on. So to look at that, you have to know, well, why do they vote? What is it that motivates them to actually cast a ballot? And what we're finding is that about 37% of them, more than a third of them, say that they voted this time thinking about the good of their community, the Latino or Hispanic community. and they wanted to represent the needs of that community, not just themselves, but the entire community, as best they could. 34% of them said that they felt that it was important to support the Democratic Party because that party cares more about them and understands them better. It's been more solicitous of them. Just 16% felt the same way about the Republican Party. So they're not feeling the love, is basically the message. They clearly, in many ways, favor the Democratic Party and their candidates. They're more than twice as likely to say that the Democratic Party cares about them. Now, there are a couple of things that are important to note about that number, 48 to 22 on that particular indice. What you see is that, yes, the Democrats have a significant advantage there, but understand that it's a minority of Hispanics who feel that way. So is there the opportunity to make significant ground with the Hispanic population? Absolutely. Now, about half of them consider themselves to be Democrats. The rest are pretty much split between being Republicans and independents. Part of the difficulty that we have is their perspective about where the GOP stands on immigration. 40% of them have concluded that the Republican Party is so anti-immigrant and, in fact, in many cases, so anti-Hispanic that they find it hard to even consider supporting the Republican Party. So that's something that we're going to have to take into consideration as we look at messaging, as we look at building relationships, as we look at an entire strategy for the Hispanic vote. They do tend to lean blue on a lot of issues that are important to them. 8 out of 10 of them want to raise the minimum wage. 3 out of 4 of them want to see Medicaid expanded. 7 out of 10 are into increasing laws to support the reduction of carbon pollution and so forth. Their views, however, can be somewhat confusing, and this is what I was alluding to a few moments ago. When you look at the whole issue of immigration, which 2 out of 3 of them said was either the most significant influence on their votes or one of a handful of most significant influences. When you look at where they stand, yeah, almost 2/3 of them support amnesty. However, only about 1/3 of them say that when it comes to what's going to happen in the coming 2 years, that President Obama has a better immigration plan than the Republicans do. So, I mean, the door is still open a bit toward having this conversation with them. What else did we find out in the election, moving away from consideration of the Hispanic vote? You have to ask the question, did the election improve America? First of all, it's fascinating to me that only 6 out of 10 Americans say that what happened in this election will actually affect them. When you look at people's belief in the system, their trust in the system, we'll look at that in just a moment, what we're finding is that cynicism is taking over. And, I mean, I think we have a chance now to start pushing back on that, but we have to be very intentional about it. But when you look at the fact that 6 out of 10 of the people who voted said, yes, I voted, but I expect to be disappointed by the people that we elected, this isn't really a strong endorsement for the people that they're putting into office. Slight majority who voted said that they want the new Congress, not President Obama, to lead the country in the next 2 years. So again, they're saying, prove yourself to me. Show me that my vote was justified.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Lee versus Wiseman, the Supreme Court ruled that for an adult to mention the word God at a public graduation constituted both psychological and religious coercion against the students. Yet consider the actions of William Samuel Johnson, a signer of the Constitution and one of America's leading educators who served as the first president of Columbia College. At his graduation exercises, William Samuel Johnson declared to the students, "You this day have received a public education, the purpose whereof hath been to qualify you better to serve your Creator and your country. Your first great duties, you are sensible, are those you owe to heaven, to your Creator and Redeemer. Founding Father William Samuel Johnson believed that a public graduation was an appropriate setting to remind students of the duties which they owed God.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Only about 4 out of 10 say that they believe that we are actually going to be better off with the new Congress. A higher proportion say that it's really not going to make any difference. About 1 out of 3 say that the new Congress will probably pass more bills than the old, but most people expect a continual degradation of the relations between the two major parties. When we look at what they expect to happen legislatively, again, the hope is waning. You look at this in terms of different initiatives. Will we have a balanced federal budget? 8 out of 10 Americans say they really want to see that passed. 8 out of 10 people who voted in this election, I should say, want to see that passed. Only about a third believe it's going to happen. Tougher border security, 3/4 want that. 2/3 expect to see something happen. If they don't, that will further diminish their trust and their hope. Lower individual taxes, 7 out of 10 want to see that happen. Only 4 out of 10 believe it will. Raising the minimum wage, 6 out of 10 would like to see it happen. Only 1 out of 5 say that it will. Lowering corporate taxes, only a third actually want to see that happen, and yet 6 out of 10 believe that will. So in terms of what they think the priorities of the incoming Congress are going to be, not necessarily aligned with what they're all about. In terms of the preferred policy approach, we're not going to go through all these numbers. What I simply want to point out to you is if you take the leading issues of the day and you ask the people who are voting which approach would you prefer, that of the newly elected Republican Congress, as best we understand what that approach will be, or what we know to be President Obama's approach, what you see is that those numbers are pretty much evenly split on most issues, which gets to something that I'll talk about in just a moment. But by and large, Americans on these issues, their eyes are glazing over. They hear a lot of talk, they don't see a lot of action. The action they see isn't where they'd like it to be. And so when we looked at the earlier numbers about the proportion of people who paid no attention to the election, we live and breathe this stuff, and we can't believe that other people don't either. And yet it's this very kind of chart that helps us to begin to understand they've kind of given up hope that legislators can make a difference in this world and in their life. And so that's why they put their attention elsewhere. I didn't go into it. I had a slide. I took it out of the presentation. But one of the things that we're finding from our research, our post-election research, as we ask people about their experience, is that by and large, they consider the elections to be a freak show. They look at it as a form of entertainment more than anything else. And so to them, it's simply a different type of soap opera, but it's not something that necessarily affects their life. Now, I'm willing to bet that almost everybody, if not everybody in this room, is a leader. And so if I understand that the people that I've been asked to lead, that I've been invited to lead, don't take me seriously enough to think that what I do makes a difference, I've got to be very intentional about not just doing business as usual, but about rethinking how the entire process works. About rethinking, how am I going to spend my time? Where am I going to devote my energy if ultimately I can't even lead because they don't take me seriously? You've got to rethink the game. We can look at the national context of why people are losing hope and how we know that people are losing that hope. And among the data that we collected, we know that less than 1 out of 4 Americans believe the country is headed in the right direction. Most people think the government's trying to do too much. They don't feel that you can trust the government to do what's right. Only 1 out of 5 say that you can always or even usually trust the government to do the right thing. 7 out of 10 Americans are worried that there's going to be a terrorist attack on American soil. 4 out of 10 people approve of the federal response to Ebola. Most people don't. Almost 6 out of 10 believe that global warming is a serious problem. Only about half of Americans believe that up to now, half of all Americans believe that life for the next generation is going to be worse. You look at their views on the economy. This remains the #1 issue. This was the #1 issue across all of the voter segments in the country. And what we found is that even though it's the #1 issue, 2 out of 3 people are still dissatisfied with the condition of the economy. 3 out of 4 are worried about the economic conditions, our policies, and where the economy is headed. Only 1 out of 3 say the economy is getting better, and 2 out of 3 say that the economic system favors the wealthy. This is where you're going to grab their attention, is with this particular issue, because it strikes them personally. They know that, and they want to know, what are you going to do about that for me? Other policy views. Half of them believe that the federal health care law went too far. Half of them believe that your state should legalize same-sex marriage as well as marijuana. Most of them say that you should give legal status to working illegals. Half of them say that abortion should always or almost always be legal. 6 out of 10 say that we should support building the pipeline. I mean, these are the kinds of things that, even though they're not always state issues, where you stand and what you do about these things makes a difference. How you interact with your delegation in D.C. makes a difference. The kinds of policy initiatives that you're putting in place in your state related to these things make a huge difference. But you've got to know where people stand, because the kind of message that you give to them is going to be critical. They're not expecting much from anybody in D.C. You look at the current job performance ratings, 40% for the president, 28% for the Speaker of the House, 28% approval for the Senate Majority Leader, 9% for Congress in general. Wow, that's not good. Your ratings are most likely much higher. What can you do about that? So we look at this partisan divide. This is the thing that we've got to wrestle with.
Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution, but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall, in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty, and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
America cannot become a strong, great, progressive, and I mean that in a good sense, nation, unless we address this issue. We'll talk about it in just a moment, but I want to set this up. When you look at the gap in views between Democratic and Republican voters, I mean, the gap is massive. You look at health care reform, 33-point gap, abortion, 40-point gap, immigration, 40-point gap, 41-point gap, same-sex marriage, 41-point gap, global warming, 55-point gap. We've got to begin to close those gaps. We can also look at the Christian population and what it brought to the election. Of course, I've been studying the Christian population as closely as anybody over the last 30 years. And what we know about this particular election is that, yes, Christians voted. About 8 out of 10 votes that were cast came from someone who is a practicing Catholic or Protestant, and about 1 out of 4 people who voted identify themselves as a white evangelical or born-again Christian.
Well, we're out of time for today, folks. That was George Barna at the ProFamily Legislators Conference, and we're going to finish out this series tomorrow. This is the second in a 3-part series to get his presentation from the ProFamily Legislators Conference. And again, encourage you to find out about that conference and send information on the conference to your state legislators. It's a great weekend for them once a year, coming into Dallas and just having a chance to relax with other legislators that have a biblical worldview and love our Constitution and want to return our nation to a true constitutional republic. Just a fantastic weekend. So check that out at our website, wallbuilders.com, and share it with your state legislators. And then as far as George Barna, you can find out more about him at barna.org, barna.org. That's barna.org, and we'll have a link today at wallbuilderslive.com. But check out his website. You can get a lot of great research and information there. You can also order his books, because you can get his books anywhere. Just a wealth of information. And you don't want to miss tomorrow the conclusion on his presentation from the Legislators Conference. I would imagine already that you are concerned and maybe a little bit shocked at some of the information that has been shared, but the solutions are very powerful as well. So stay with us tomorrow, and we'll get the conclusion with George Barna from the ProFamily Legislators Conference. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand under